Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Papua New Guinea, where he addressed the Forum of Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation Summit. He also held bilateral talks with the Prime Minister James Marape today. The Indian Prime Minister arrived in the country on Sunday after attending the G7 summit in Hiroshima. Now, this is the first time that an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Papua New Guinea. India and the United States are actively seeking to counter Beijing's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Papua New Guinea will sign a defense pact with the United States. The Defense Cooperation Agreement will give the U.S. troops access to the Pacific nation's ports and the airports. Now, the Pacific Island nation is strategically located close to the trade routes to Australia and Japan. Washington and New Delhi are concerned that Beijing is trying to woo these tiny nations with diplomatic and financial incentives. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will be holding separate talks with 14 Pacific leaders, including New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins. Now, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in the nation's capital on Sunday night. Modi was met by a gun salute, traditional dancers as well. Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister even extended his hand to touch Prime Minister Narendra Modi's feet. Now, in Indian tradition, the gesture is meant to show respect to the elders and receiving their blessings. As per the reports, China has been pouring money into these countries in the Pacific. This has alarmed New Delhi and its allies in the Quad. New Delhi is increasing its engagement with Pacific Islands. This is due to this strategic location and fears that China could dominate the region. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the third summit of the Forum for Indo-Pacific Islands Cooperation, or FIPIC, which is currently underway. Post the summit and the bilateral talks have been scheduled between the participating countries.
आपकी तरह हम मल्टीलेटरलिज्म में विश्वास रखते हैं, फ्री, ओपन और इंक्लूसिव इंडो पैसिफिक का समर्थन करते हैं। सभी देशों की संप्रभुता और अखंडता को सम्मान करते हैं। ग्लोबल साउथ की आवाज भी यूएन सुरक्षा परिषद में बुलंदी से उठनी चाहिए। इसके लिए अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थाओं का सुधार हमारी साझा प्राथमिकता होनी चाहिए।
Now, after the summit, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will interact with scholars from the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. That is before departing for Sydney, where he is scheduled to spend the next 2 days. Ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that Australia and India share a commitment to a stable, secure and a prosperous Indo-Pacific. Together, we have an important role to play in supporting this vision. This is the first time that an Indian Prime Minister is visiting Australia since 2014. Prime Minister Modi will hold bilateral talks and meet Australian business leaders as well. He will return to India on Wednesday night. For more on this, we are now being joined by Principal Diplomatic Correspondent Siddhant Sibal. He's joining us live from Sydney. A very good morning to you, Siddhant. Now, this is the first time that an Indian Prime Minister has visited Papua New Guinea. How do you assess New Delhi's outreach towards the Pacific Islands, especially with China's growing ambitions in the region?
Well, when it comes to the Pacific, it has emerged as an important geographical area in the wider Indo-Pacific vision that is backed by India, Japan, Australia, United States. Now, it has also seen increased geopolitical contestation, with China playing its role in increasing trade. It even signed a security pact last year with Solomon Islands that raised eyebrows. But essentially, when it comes to India's role, India has two-pronged strategy. One, of course, a strong diaspora connect, especially with countries like Fiji, where there is a huge number of the Indian diaspora members present. And second, of course, is under the rubric of the Indo-Pacific vision, India has been helping build capacity and helping in climate change activities, infrastructure with these Pacific countries. Now, we saw the Indian Prime Minister's address at the Pacific meet, and one key message he sent out was that India wants to be the voice of the global South, and India will put their aspiration, the aspiration of Pacific countries in front of the world via its G20 presidency.
Absolutely, Siddhant. Now, just yesterday as well, US President Joe Biden acknowledged India's role in the Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Modi will later be departing for Sydney in this leg of his three-nation tour. What will dominate the talks in Sydney? And at a large, how is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's global outreach being seen at the moment?
Well, specifically when it comes to the Sydney visit, there are two key focus areas. First, of course, is strong cooperation with Australia. There has been in the past a number of focus areas like trade. Just last year, India and Australia signed the ECTA Pact, and there is now focus on a wider free trade agreement, focus also on defense and security. The second aspect is the diaspora angle. We know that the Indian Prime Minister is going to address a mega diaspora event here in Sydney, and there is a huge number of members of the Indian diaspora. In fact, since the time we have been here in past few hours, we have seen a lot of members of the Indian diaspora. Some of them have also spoken to us. But essentially, when it comes to Indian Prime Minister's global outlook, the three-country visit, whether it's Japan, Papua New Guinea, and then, of course, Australia, will help further India's agenda on the high table and also focus on India's perspective, whether it's being the voice of the global South, whether it's climate change, or whether it's the vision India supports on the Indo-Pacific.
Right, Siddhant, apart from economic cooperation at the moment, also talk to us about Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's growing popularity. Apparently yesterday, Australian Prime Minister Albanese said that he's facing a torrent of requests from prominent people wanting to attend the events where Prime Minister Modi would be speaking. Tell us more on that.
Well, a similar kind of challenge even the US President Biden also talked about. Remember, the Indian Prime Minister travels to US next month, and there will be a state dinner in his honor. And the US President said that he is getting a deluge of requests to attend that state dinner. But specifically talking about the diaspora event, 20,000 Indian Australians and Indians are expected to attend the event, which will take place tomorrow here in Sydney. And as you pointed out, when the informal conversation was taking place on the sidelines of the Quad meeting that took place over the weekend, both the Australian Prime Minister and the American President talked about this particular challenge they are facing. In fact, the US President went ahead by saying that I would like to have your autograph. That points to his popularity not only in the region but across the world. In fact, we saw how the Indian Prime Minister was welcomed in Papua New Guinea, with the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea trying to touch his feet in that traditional Indian way. So there is a popularity for the Indian Prime Minister globally, especially among the world leaders, but also reflective of what is viewed about India globally.
Absolutely, Siddhant. We'll, of course, be tracking the summit in Sydney later today. But thank you so much for joining us in WION and sharing your insights with us. Thanks very much.